Good evening. It is 6:02. Call to meeting the Proposition O Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, Wednesday, April 10th, 2013. We got a busy agenda, so I see it looks like everybody's here. So we'll call a roll, and we're all here. So no need to go through that process. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Through no easy amount of work, we have and I've read all three minutes, which are very detailed, unlike the Board of Trustees minutes, and I would like to move approval of the minutes of February 6, 2013, February 20th, 2013, and March 13th, 2013.
I'll move that. I'll
First it, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is non-agenda public comments. Ms. Cheers.
Good evening. I attended the school board meeting last evening, and during the course of one of the agenda items, I think it was L or K something, there was a discussion regarding the bond oversight new committee members. And there was a bit of a discussion. I don't want to go too deep into that, but what I wanted to speak about was the fact that there was an attorney there, I think his name was Carlin, and he basically, based on my interpretation, now I'm not a legal mind, but he was recommending that the board have some part in the selection of the bond oversight committee members. The issue arose because, according to what was discussed on the panel, evidently there were I don't know how many members applied, but 2 members were selected by the selection committee, and only 1 was on the board agenda. It was a female. And so the question was, what happened to the other selection? Evidently Dr. Brand, for whatever reason, had chosen not to pick this gentleman. Well, 2 issues. Number 1 is I do not believe that the board should have any part of this. The reason being, I've been coming to these meetings for 3 years. I remember back on BB when Arlie Lacasa's husband, Ed Bagaboro, was on the Prop BB Oversight Committee. I remember when one of the board members, sorority sisters, was on it. I remember when Dr. Gondera handpicked Yolanda Hernandez, who is now indicted down in San Isidro. My personal opinion is that the board should have nothing to do with this. Additionally, I questioned the fact, because I was there the evening that they went over the procedures for the selection of members to your committee. Dr. Brand was not supposed to have anything to do with that selection. Why he does, I do not know. The fact that our board totally overlooks policy and procedure is extremely disturbing. There was a lady that walked up to me in the parking lot who was from the Philippines. She was a doctor in the Philippines. She was there last night because she's an ROP now, working on a phlebotomy, because she's got to start her whole career over again over here. She told me she has never seen anything like this in her life, that this reminded her of her country. That's how bad we look. So I would just like to recommend that if this comes, if you all have anything to do with that, that you just push to have the procedures continue the way they are. But Dr. Brand should not be part of the selection committee, because if he starts putting a hand in it, we're going to go back several steps. Thank you very much.
Ms. Cheers. If it's okay with the rest of the committee, since we have Dr. Alt here, well, I guess it may be for the performance audit, I would like to trail or hear item number 6 first, then we'll deal with just a little bit later, if that's okay with the committee. Okay.
No, that's fine, let's let it go.
Kathy,
Really.
Kathy.
Okay. As you know, and I don't have all these dates memorized, but the board issued some bond anticipation notes. Short-term debt, which are 5 years in length, for the financing of the Montgomery High Gymnasium and National City Middle School projects. And subsequent to that, I accessed the bond official statement, which is on our website, to the Municipal Security Review Board, which interestingly is now headed by Jay Goldstone. I think it's Jay Goldstone, who was the former CFO for the city of San Diego, on March 25th. And with the assistance, the tremendous assistance of the California League of Bond Oversight Committees, we went through the bond official statement and compared it to some prior actions by the Board of Trustees. And there, at first glance, and this frankly raises the issue, you know, it's just sort of like a member and a outside nonprofit review this document, but this has not been based, this report that I have in front of you is not based upon a financial advisor or a CPA or anything like that, something we had tested in the past. So, but there, let me just put in a nutshell what the concerns were. When the Board of Trustees adopted a resolution on November 13th, 2012 to authorize the bonds, they said that the interest rates on the note shall not exceed 3% and 3%. And in reviewing the bond official statement, on it was page 2, the interest rate on the longer terms of the bands are, there's an interest rate of 5%. Now, I don't know how many of you know, and the difference between yield and interest rate, but when you take into fact that more bonds were sold through what's called a premium than the actual par value of the bonds, the actual true interest rate is actually more like 1.6 or 1.7%. But the fact of the matter is, as I read it, is that the board resolution said 3%, and there's bonds in there, there are notes in there 5%. So that's a concern, and also it shows, hopefully the district knows that in fact we're watching as a committee. The second thing that was unclear from reading the bond official statement is who's paying for the debt service on the bonds. And I might note that the notes are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Alt, the notes are not callable, so these are 5-year notes. And that there's an interest payment of $391,000 on July 1, 2013. So the first question is, the interest rate from the official statement is higher than what the board adopted in the resolution. The second one is, how are the monies going to be, how is the debt service or interest payments on the notes going to be paid for? And the third issue is there's bond premium. Bond premium is an excess amount borrowed that can be basically you've got two alternatives. You can take the money and put it in a reserve fund to pay the debt service on the bonds, or you can take the excess proceeds and use it to pay for project costs. I got wind of two Attorney General opinions that one of them really called out Poway on their general obligation bonds using bond premium for anything other than setting in a debt service reserve fund to pay the debt service. And they called them out on that. And we are using the bond premium on these notes to pay for the project costs. And the issue, and this is where it comes in, I think, where we as a committee need legal advice, is there a difference between general obligation bonds, which is what was used to finance most of the construction of the school, district for Prop O and bond anticipation notes. Now, subsequent to docketing the letter, I talked to Dr. Alt regarding that, and I guess there's a feeling that the bond anticipation notes are different than general obligation bond, and the rules of the road are different. So what I would recommend as chair is that we take this next month and we talk with Dr. Alt as a committee and answer those three questions. Can in fact you borrow more than at a 3% interest rate pursuant to the resolution that was adopted by the board in November? How is the debt service going to be paid, and can bond premium, the excess proceeds, be used to pay for project costs rather than be set aside in a reserve fund to pay the debt? With that, I guess probably the best would be to have Dr. Alt maybe get his initial thoughts on this, and then hear some committee discussion. It's kind of technical, and it's kind of boring, but it's kind of within our
I think
purview.
it's very exciting.
Well, depends on
Yes, it does, certainly. Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate being here today to talk about this. I appreciate the time that we spent yesterday on the phone and that you included me on the communication, so I had an opportunity to be out front of some of the questions. So I'm going to try and get them in order. I might not have them in the exact same order, but the first question is about the interest rate. And there is a bond resolution, or a board resolution, I'm sorry, that authorized us for no more or not to exceed 3%. And our chair is correct in that there is the notation of a 5% coupon, but a coupon is actually different than the interest rate. So the coupon is what you as a buyer get back. So if a bond, for example, has $1,000 face value, you take the face value and you divide the number of payments you're going to get, which is a coupon, and that determines the coupon rate. So each payment you get for your bond, in the example that I just gave, in a 5% bond at $1,000 would be a 5% coupon. So that's the percent that you're getting paid against the face value of the bond. It's not interest per se. So there's a difference between the coupon rate that was mentioned and what's actually called the all-inclusive cost of the interest, or the true cost of interest, and there are two different calculations. What the board actually authorized in their resolution was a not to exceed amount of 3%, and the resolution, the way we designed it, was for the all-inclusive cost of the interest, which was a total of 1.59% or 1.6% if you round up. So we were about 50% of what the board actually authorized us in terms of the cost of interest to issue these bands. I'll go through them, and then I'm happy to address all the questions, and we'll try and get them in order. But so that's the first thing, the coupon rate versus the actual cost of the interest. The premium. Now, when I talked to you yesterday, Nick, I communicated to you that we were using the premium for project proceeds. I was wrong. I followed up on it today. I validated through our trustee, which is Union Bank, working with the county treasurer's office, that we took the premium and we put them into a debt service account, for lack of a better term. So our payments, our interest payments, until the bonds have to be retired, will be paid from the premium. But that said, our discussion yesterday was that it is in the general obligation bonds, and in cabs in particular, you cannot use premium for cost of issuance. And cost of issuance is what we pay our consultants that help us issue the bonds, as opposed to project-related costs or building costs and or paying interest. There's an argument to be made that you don't want to borrow additional money to pay the interest. So essentially what we did is we borrowed enough to cover the projects, and then we borrowed a little bit more to cover our interest payment, so that we're not paying general fund dollars towards the interest payment over the life of the bands. And so there is a distinction between short-term notes, which a band is, a bond anticipation note is a short-term note because it's 5 years or less. General obligation bonds are typically 25, 30, and even some capital appreciation bonds go out to 40 years and longer. And so the rules of the game with really long-term borrowing like 40 year bonds is a little bit different than the short-term borrowing. And so that brings up the issue of the notes being callable. We've all, most of us have all heard Mr. McAllister from San Diego County talk about the use of CABs and where they're appropriate and how we should use them, and that CABs being long-term notes up to 40 years should always be callable. And so that gives us the opportunity, if for some reason in 20 or 25 years we have the opportunity to pay them off, that we can go ahead and do that rather than pay the large principal payments that come up in 40 years. However, in short-term notes like a band, they're not attractive to investors if there's a potential of them being called back and us paying them off and then not getting the yield over 5 years versus 1 or 2 years. So, and Tom was involved in this as well. On our calls with our financial advisors and interaction with the investors, we were actually not as attractive as an investment with our bands if we made them callable. So I made the decision to make them non-callable so they were more attractive to investors, and that helped us get our actual interest costs down, our actual costs basically at a savings for all of us taxpayers.
We were talking about the market being about 20 basis points higher if it had a call feature.
Right.
So we save basically 0.2%.
And so there's a couple things I'll just add in here. We use a bond counsel that's recognized in the industry as being an expert in bond counsel. We use an independent financial advisor, so they were all part of our issuance team. And aside from that, we also had San Diego County Office of Education did an independent review outside of the people that we hired and paid for. They examined our assumptions for the issuance of the bands, our ability to pay them back, our credit ratings and things like that. And they issued a letter to the superintendent outlining that our assumptions were appropriate, that our cost of issuance were well within reasonable sensitivity, and that all in all we ended up getting the bands at what I would call a bit of a discount on our cost of issuance. So we got a good deal, we were represented well in the market, we were able to turn the premium, our investment grade credit rating, and the fact that our notes are good notes, we were able to turn that into a lower cost of borrowing for us and get premium back so that we could pay the interest without touching general fund or any of the other funds that we would have to make the payments on this. The last piece of this is that there could be concern about bond anticipation notes because we essentially, for lack of a better term, borrowed against general obligation, the next issuance of the general obligation bonds. So if we weren't able to issue GO bonds in the next 5 years to retire this debt, we'd have to take it on as a general fund liability. However, we worked with the county, we worked with the county treasurer's office and their assessments in terms of the valuation of properties, and their assessment was we were well within sensitivity of being able to retire the debt of the bands, and more likely that with the projected AV assessed value growth, that we'll be able to issue closer to $70 to $100 million worth of general obligation bonds. So not only will we be able to retire this debt in 5 years, but we'll also have project money to the tune of maybe 35 to up to maybe $70 million, so that we'll be able to do some more projects then. So we won't just be issuing general obligation bonds just to retire these bands. And so with that, I know that's a lot of complicated stuff, and I covered it pretty quick, but at least it hopefully will inspire some discussion.
Through the chair,
Sure.
do you anticipate any problems paying the money back?
No, in fact, that was the biggest thing we want to look at, is whether or not in the GO bond we're going to have the ability to pay the money back. The minimum threshold would be for us to go ahead and issue general obligation bonds in 5 years and be able to retire about $38 million worth of debt. And that's not going to require much AV growth in our district to be able to accomplish that task. So that's the minimum threshold. We'd like, since there's a cost of issuance, since there's a lot of labor and expense that goes into issuing general obligation bonds, we'd like to get quite a bit more so we could do a project as well. But the minimum threshold is just to be able to retire this debt, and that's going to be a fairly simple matter.
One more question, through the chair.
What is our rating relative to the rest of the school district communities in the state of California? How do we stand up with those people?
I don't know all of there's about 1,200 school districts in the state, and so I don't know off the top of my head where they all stand, but what I can tell you, when we asked the question, how do we stand against other municipalities, school districts, cities, and counties that are issuing bonds, our financial advisors gave an assessment back that our credit rating is strong against other municipalities, that while we've had a downgrade of our credit rating relative to this ban, that we're still investment grade, and many other municipalities are dropping out of investment grade into more moderate risk grade investments.
May we have a copy of that report, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I gotta admit, my head's still spinning, and I don't understand a lot about this, but I got a couple of questions. First, an observation. You know, we were originally told that the bonds, the bans, would be callable, and I understand now that was probably a bit of a naive understanding on my part, and my financial counselor, Mr. O'Neill here, has kind of corrected me on that separately, but the only point I want to make is, I think that was an impression that several of us had, so.
And we did look at that, Mr. McCartney. We did actually explore looking at the callable feature at 2.5 and at 3 years.
Yeah. And I guess there's just communication or whatever on that issue.
Can I touch on that real quick?
Yeah.
What happened, Rick started this process, and he did it in the same way that I would have. There was very much concern about making sure that these were callable, particularly since Mr. McAllister was talking about AB 182 in his bill that he's proposed, that all capital appreciation bonds be callable. So we were very sensitive to that. We made them callable, and we thought that it was going to be essentially no effect to our cost of issuance. When we got down to the close, really down to the very last minute, and those who are going to sell the bonds, they go out into the market a day or two ahead of time. They start, for lack of a better term, they poll the investors to see if there's interest. And when they polled the investors were pulling back a bit because it was callable, and they weren't as interested because there was the potential that they may only have a 3-year investment. Where in a long-term 30 to 40-year issuance, you really do want to have them callable, but in the short term, if it's going to cost you money to make them callable, and we really didn't think we were going to have the ability to pay them off in 2 years, we thought we were paying extra money just to kind of deal with the sensitivity in the environment. And so I made the decision that I'd rather just explain it to you and the savings we got from it, and then go ahead and spend more money just to say they were callable.
Got it, understand.
Thank you.
So, I think I have 2 questions, other than my head is still spinning. I understood you said you borrowed a little extra to cover the debt service, so we're borrowing to cover debt service.
Well, that's the premium. So when you have a situation that you can offer them for premium, what was happening in the general obligation bond market is many municipalities, particularly school districts, were offering their bonds at premium, and they were using that premium to pay consultants. So the consultants were getting extreme amounts of payments. Bond counsels were getting $1 million. Financial advisors were getting literally $1 million, $1.5 million, because the bonds were offered at a premium. So school districts were pulling the premium and paying consultants and cost of issuance.
So maybe I need to understand a little bit more about that premium. You're issuing the bond at some value.
Right. And so depending on the value or the grade of your bond, you may have the opportunity to issue it at a premium. So essentially you're able to issue, we were able to issue less bonds and get more money. And in getting more money, what we were able to do is take that premium, put it into an account to pay the debt service. So you have to do one of 2 things. If we issued without...
So that premium is people, the buyers of the bonds pay you a little bit extra?
Essentially, yes. Essentially, yes. In simple terms.
Okay, and you have to bank that. This is back to that discussion, the Attorney General's readings on that. I think we're probably going to hear some more about that.
The Attorney General's opinion is that you should do that for general obligation bonds, and it is a good practice to do in bans as well. It's not as critical in the short term.
In this particular case, you elected to use it as part of the debt service then?
We banked it
We
to
banked
to pay the debt service.
That
Consistent
probably
with the
is-
Attorney General's
Now, is that how you're gonna cover this first payment of, 391K?
That's how we'll cover all the payments.
I have a question. So, of the 36 and change, is that correct, that you borrowed?
Yeah, it's almost.
So the project cost is 30, well, how much is actually going into actual related project costs?
The total issuance was 37,500,000, little over. There's 23,159,000 for Montgomery High School project, so that includes about 20 million for the project itself, and then $3.2 million for premium. So that's to pay the interest for the Montgomery High School project. And then for National City Middle, the project amount is about 13 million, just shy of 13 million, and then the premium is 1.4 million. So in total, we have project-related costs of 32,800,000, and premium of 4.7, and that 4.7 will pay the interest over all the life of the 5 years. And I'm taking that from a report that you attached for the final report that came out of our band offering. It was in your email to this group.
Can I maybe phrase it a different way? You offered an interest rate higher than what the market is, so you could generate a bond premium, and I'm putting now words in my mouth, so you could pay, because you didn't have the money to pay for the debt service, so you had to offer a higher interest rate to make sure you set aside in a fund to pay the debt service.
No, not exactly. What we leveraged was our investment grade status to get more money from bonds, because we are investment grade and we were good risk, to issue a premium so we could use the premium to pay the debt service. So the other option would have been to only issue at the project related expenses and then have to pay for the interest, like the payment that you mentioned. We'd have to pay it out of general fund or some other fund. So we used our good investment status to get a premium so that we can pay the interest over the 5 years.
But back to your question, was the rate that you let it at competitive? The implication of your question is that they want a higher rate, making that attractive that they shouldn't have done.
And if that's the question, we did not. In fact, our actual costs were lower than what the board authorized, and we got a good return on it. We didn't have to offer it a higher interest payback so that we could get this premium. We got this premium because we're a good credit risk.
And maybe I can simplify it. One of the things that you see, and we had two options, a higher premium or a higher coupon, 5%, or a lower coupon, 3%. And what happens is, to fund what we needed to fund, we would have had to sell more bonds with a lower coupon rate than we did with the higher coupon rate. But we got the same amount of money, and what happened is our total interest costs were down at about 1.49 as opposed to about 1.5 when we talked about it last November. And it would have been higher had we sold more bonds, because even though the rate's low, the amount of bonds is higher. So I hope that explains it.
Does anybody else have? I just had one question and one comment. I guess, maybe I'm the only one in the world, when I see a resolution that says interest rate of this, and then I read a bond official statement that says interest rate on page 2, and it says this, and one says 5 and one says 3. I'm a little person. One says 5, one says 3. There's a disconnect in my mind with what the board was told and what was actually borrowed.
The coupon rate, which is what you're referring to, the 5% coupon rate, isn't a cost of issuance. It isn't an expense that we pay. It's a relationship between the bond issuer and the buyer. So when you buy a bond, you're going to get payments back, essentially, on the bond. Unless it's a no coupon bond, then it has to mature and then you get the full face value of the bond. And in the case of our bonds having a coupon, if you bought a bond for $1,000 and it had a 10-year maturity and it were a 5% coupon, each time you get a coupon, literally used to be a bond with a coupon that you tear off. Yeah. And so that would be 5% of your 1,000. And every time you pull the coupon, you get $50. And so the coupon is talking about our relation, mine as the bondholder and yours as the buyer. It's not actually an interest rate. It shows as a percentage, it looks like an interest rate, but it's completely different than the actual interest that we pay.
And find out, because this is kind of technical, maybe we can, thank you for the information, I really appreciate it. This is one sort of off-the-wall question, but I think it's important. You know, these official statements have disclosures on final financial condition of the district. Was there a conscious decision internally to exclude or on the discussion the situation with the L Street property and any potential financial liability in the future? Was that purposely not put in there, or is it, in fact, you don't feel that the district does not feel that it's an issue at all that should be disclosed?
We had great discussions about L Street. So one of the things that happens when investors are looking at any municipality, they'll Google us, they'll look at the headline value of who they're buying bonds for, and we have a lot of headline value. We all know that we're in the paper a lot. So that isn't something that was under the radar. And Mr. O'Neill's brought it up and talking about our multi-year projections, and if we had to pay the actual amortization on those bonds, that we would have a substantial liability. But we don't right now. The way that our debt's structured on that, we don't have that. And so we did discuss it. The banks are interested in it. When they look at us for investments, we have to show them all of our assets, all of our potential liabilities. They do pretty extensive due diligence. And even if we had made a conscious effort, which we did not, they knew about it anyways, because they are pretty active about, even financiers that are working with SunPower as an example, they're financing SunPower's projects, they're still looking at whether or not we have the ability to pay SunPower, and they're Googling us and looking at the headline value. So there really, at this point, isn't anything that we can keep hidden from our investors, for lack of a better term. And we wouldn't try that anyways, because you have to have a long-term relationship with Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and all of these investors. If you don't keep that relationship, and we know that we need to issue more general obligation bonds, then we're going to lose value in the market. We just can't risk that.
And with that, anybody else with any questions? I know this is like it's nice on my economics classes.
I'm just a little bit concerned, I guess, with the projections of the AD. And I wondered, can you make available to us what you were supplied with from the assessor's office, or what you presented to the Standards & Poor's and everything, as far as the stats and everything?
Yeah. To this extent I can, and I don't mean that like I'm not able to. It's that it wasn't a simple report, one-page report that says here's our projections. But I can synthesize it, and I definitely want you guys to have the information. But we spent time with the county assessors. We looked at their records and things like that. So some of it we have to do our own analysis. But the value in that was we also had to have an outside agency, in this case the County Office of Education, had an independent financial advisor review our assumptions and said they think that we have a sufficient ability to pay as well. That is not a secret. It's been provided to the governing board.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The
Yeah.
information that was provided to us just recently, could that be made public, or could we just put it on the website regarding that?
I don't have any issue with sending the letter that you got, particularly from the county, and that's probably the easiest one. It's the least technical. That's probably the easiest one to look at, because it says in their assessment, we think that these estimates were reasonable. We think that the district has the ability, based on their assessed value and their other assumptions, to pay this back. And it's short and sweet. It's one page, and that really summarizes it. And then I'm not synthesizing anything. It's just that letter. Would that be acceptable?
I think publishing that would be,
Yeah.
Yes, Kevin, and then John, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I just have a statement, is that maybe to help understand the premium a little bit, is if we're in the market for a 2000 Mustang, and there were 3 of them out there, and they had different, they were good, better condition. You're willing to pay a little bit more for the non-smoked in low mileage Mustang than you are for the others, and that's sort of how the institutional buyers will look at this, and they're willing to pay a little more because they've got quality. The other part of it is the callability of a 5-year note, and again, this isn't our Aunt Sadie who's going to put this in her Roth or any of that stuff. These are institutional buyers. They want to do it once. They want to lock in what their return is going to be, and they're not. Again, it's kind of like that Mustang with a shaky transmission. They're not going to pay top dollar for it, or even maybe want it, if they think they're going to have to deal with buying it out. So even in your own home loans, you're likely to find a 3-2-1 clause that says that you can't refinance in 3 years, 2 years, 1 year without paying the fees and costs. So, you know, I'm altogether comfortable with that, because I think we got a better deal by offering a better deal, and you balance that. You wouldn't do it much past 5 years, but for 5 years, I'm altogether comfortable with that.
Okay, anybody else? John?
Yeah. Dr. Ault, I'd like to ask you a little philosophical question, if I might. This is the Bond Oversight Committee, if you're well aware of. And, you know, when I look at the word oversight, from my perspective, after being on this committee for a bit, the definition by Merriam-Webster states that it's a watchful and responsible care of, or regulatory supervision. Yet I don't see that process occurring within this district. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and I'd like your response, please. One of them is, whose money is this? Is this the district's money? Whose money are we talking about?
We are absolutely stewards of the taxpayers' money. So
Great.
I'm working for you to take care of your money in the best way we can.
So you're not governed by Dr. Brand if he tells you to do something or something else, right?
There's one governing body, and that's the Board of Education. I work for Dr. Brand, but there's only one policy body, and that's the board, and we have a responsibility
And
to
who are
take care
they
of
responsible to?
taxpayers.
Yes, and if they don't do their job, what happens?
If the board doesn't do their job,
That's exactly what I'm asking.
you make a vote on whether or not you think they're doing a good job. or
Well,
not.
we're well aware of how we feel they're doing, but I just wanted just this from your perspective, sir. Now, the last question that I would ask you is, how transparent do all of these money transfers occur within the district? If we wanted to see everything that you're doing with regards to monetary policies, should we have access to that?
Well, I hope Mr. O'Neill had an experience with that today that will show how I feel, what my philosophy is about transparency. At the end of the day, we're managing your money and your property and probably your kids' lives as well. So at the end of the day, my own personal philosophy is that we should be able to sit down like we did today with Mr. O'Neill and look at the L Street binder, and the way we discussed it was that I'd rather sit down with him and know for sure what he's looking for and let him look at the documents, spend time with me asking me questions about it, and then he can stick Post-it notes on what it is that he's interested in having, and we produce it. That's my method of operation, and it's my way of trying to engender trust. Whether you like me or not isn't as important as if you trust me or not. Now, I hope I have both. I hope I can earn both. But at the end of the day, even if you say, I don't like the guy, but I trust what he does, that's what's most important to me. And hopefully I provided an example of that today.
Well, I appreciate that. And of course, if I had a chance to play golf with you for about 18 holes, I could find out whether I liked your The bottom line on all of this is, quite frankly, that I'm concerned. I'm concerned because we are called an oversight committee. And I believe that oversight is exactly what Merriam-Webster states that it is. And if this committee meets, and I happen to know all the people now fairly well in this committee, and they're very bright, and they're right at the cutting edge of monetary fiscal responsibility. And if they come up with a recommendation and present that to the Board of Trustees, and that's just blown out of the water and ignored, I think the public has to know about that, and the board has to have its feet held to the fire because of it. Because what I've seen in the very short time I've been on this board is an arrogance that's beyond anything that I've ever noticed in any board that I've sat on, or any board that I've had an occasion to view. So I'm hopeful that you will take my comments very seriously and use those in the administration of your tasks. And I appreciate the work that you do, and I thank you for that.
May I add to that in a way that I think that I might be able to help this committee provide some oversight? Tom and I'm sorry, may I take
Oh,
a few
go ahead.
minutes? Tom and I, the way I see it, whether he likes it or not, we're joined at the hip. He builds stuff, but he can't build stuff, and we all know he does a good job building stuff, but he can't build stuff unless we have the money, we get the money, and we manage our money well. So everything that we do in terms of trying to get bands, he's involved in, and he's opened the door for me to be involved in a lot of construction-related things too, just for another set of eyes. So one of the things that we do when we try and issue like these bands or general obligation bonds is we select a bond counsel. We have financial advisors that are independent, and they have a role that they play separate and distinct from the bond counsel. And so one of the things that I've heard, Nick, I hope you don't mind if I call you Nick.
That's why I'm naming Nick, my last name's to be on
Okay, and last name of Alt, that's hard to get through the Marinovich. So anyways, one of the things that I've heard as a concern from this group through your chair is that you want an independent counsel or you want an independent financial advisor. Now, I will tell you my leadership style is if I don't agree with something, I'll say so, and I don't particularly agree with that, but I think that we need to have some synergy with that. So you haven't had any involvement in this group at all in picking the counsel we use or the financial advisor that we use. And so coming in new, I'm already preparing requests for qualifications. Tom and I have not only talked about where we want to go with it from our administrative perspectives, but asking this committee to provide volunteers and having community members sit with us to develop essentially an evaluation criteria. We let a request for qualifications for bond counsel. We get back whatever responses that we do. Independent of that, we would work together on identifying a criteria that we pick a pool, for lack of a better term, of those who applied. And then once we get the applications in, we sit down, we look at them, we decide who we want to interview. We sit down, we interview them, and we make recommendations to the governing board about a pool of bond counsel or financial advisors or this team of people who are going to advise us. And the reason why Tom and I both think that that's a good idea is so that we don't have two separate sets of consultants with potentially different philosophies. Because financial advisors and bond counsels can have varying philosophies. But if we're linked together and we pick them together and we use a valid evaluation criteria and we've done this as a team, then we can all rely on the information we get back from our bond counsel and our financial advisor. So that's a way that we'd like to go. And we haven't had an opportunity, Nick, to approach you about that because we've had some other things going. But this is a good opportunity to let you know where we're going with that.
Best practice.
Yeah, that is one of the best practices. God, this reminds me of work. I used to do that stuff.
Well, you don't have to
Well,
do
then
it
you're
yourself.
qualified to do it again.
Is that what you say?
Get paid well.
Is that how
Get paid
retirement
well.
works? You stop doing it for somebody?
Thank you very much.
For free.
I have another question. We have a busy agenda. Thank you, Al.
Thank you very much.
Al, I appreciate it. And I really like the idea. What I'd like to do, Tom, is that YouTube?
I can get that up for you. So is mine.
No, do I have, I'm sorry, Ms. Cheers, who wants to comment on that agenda item?
Yes, sir, I did. I have a question for you to ask Mr. Alt regarding, let's say, the Montgomery project. How quickly, I'm not a contractor, but how quickly are the bills paid? The bills are submitted to the district for the project. What is the turnaround time for a check to be issued? That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is just a comment. I have observed Dr. Brandt. I respect you, Mr. Alt, but he is your boss. I saw him last night. He was not happy with
A few of us saw him. Well, my wife is my real boss, and that's the one I have to answer to first.
you. But my point is this. I believe, as you had said, Dr. Grubb, excuse me, independent means independent. And this is just Mrs. Cheer saying this, so take it with a grain of salt. I wouldn't trust any legal group that this district brought to you to choose from. I believe you need to go out and find your own, but that's just my opinion. That's it. Could you get an answer to that question about turnaround time, sir?
Well, I mean, maybe Tom's, I don't know.
Well, can I answer that?
Sure.
Yeah, with all due respect, Dr. Alt, while I think that working together solves the common interest of many issues and many things, and I think it's important that we have a camaraderie and a collegiality together and work off a commonality of interest, when it comes to legal opinions or financial opinions from an independent source, we are the watchdog, basically, for the public. I get this feeling when it comes back to me that, since I've been on this board for 4 to 6 months, that there is a sensibility within the district that it's our money. That I hear this on a number of occasions from teachers, administrators, retired teachers and retired administrators. And it's not the district's money. It's the public's money. It's the public's asset. And as a bond oversight committee, we have a duty, an obligation, a responsibility, a trust. We should have our feet held accountable if we don't do our job, and we can't do our job